Even that thing about turning it around, I've never kind of spoken about it. I mean, I'm sure not many people know about that, but and I don't make a big thing about it. But if you're thinking back, now that you asked it, it is kind of interesting that, by the time I was like 14, 15, I was finding it difficult to read. And then it's the whole thing, Sheikh, you're kind of gifted from the beginning. And even now I find it difficult reading. I have to concentrate, and that's, it's a struggle, but with the struggle you get the benefits. And so that journey of study was essentially off the roadmap. And I got to Tarim. There was a brother, Thaqib Mahmoud. He's a sheikh now. He's even though I've not seen him for like 12 years, he's one of the most beloved people to me, because we got to Tarim and we kind of met each other. There was only two of us who spoke English, and I said, okay, I'm here to study, and I'm very serious at this point. I'm not like I am now. And I said, we're going to speak English for a week, and after that, no English. So we were chit-chatting and getting like off like a house on fire, like really friendly and all the rest of it. He's from London, so we're like chit-chatting and all the rest of it. And then the week passes, and obviously I know what I've said, and that's it, no English. And then I think it created a lot of tension. And he's, mashallah, he's big. And like, if he was in Glasgow, he'd be a tough guy. Yeah. Understand? So it was, and I didn't back down. Okay. Even though we could have chatted for hours, we were not there to chat. And I applied to Mahad al-Fath. I went there and had a look. And it was interesting because the first day there was like 3,000 people attending to apply for the first year. And it was a surreal experience because the Mudir, Sheikh Abdul Fattah, Bizm, he basically had everyone lined up in batches of like 500, just walking past and touching them, saying, next, you can go into the next phase. Is it like, I've not watched Hunger Games, but I can imagine this is like he was onto something. So he would just touch someone on the it's almost like he's saying, this person's of the right material.
And how would he know what was the...
I have no idea. So this is like, I need to ask him at some point. And then...
So this was picking who was going to get entry into...
Not entry, this is getting to the next stage.
The assessment process.
Yeah, so then checking who you are, and do you have a family of scholars and all the rest of it, and then after that you'd have a written test, and then, there was kind of three processes. And I realised that when I started to compare myself with other people, that I could see studying and memorising. I was a Mahad al-Fath, and we used to have a Quran, we used to hifl, and then we used to have to recite the Quran. And there's like 60 people in our specific halaqah, and then the teacher would say, okay, start the page that you're supposed to have memorised. And then some of the Arab students at the front, like Algerians and Moroccans, they would, their turn would be the end. So it'd go through, and by about 40 minutes you'd be at the front. And they'd say, okay, what do we need to memorise? They'd get the mushaf out. And they hadn't memorised the page. And within like 7 minutes they've memorised the page. And that page I would have started 2 weeks ago. All through that period I was thinking, if I'm not gifted in this, should I just give up? And I thought, no, because, when we're asked to deliver, I can do as well as these people that are very, very sharp in terms of memory. But perhaps in terms of understanding, they're not. It's something, if you're given something, that may be, balancing something else that you're not given.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the MuslimCentric podcast. This episode of Desert Island Gems is a particularly special one for me because I had the good fortune to interview one of my teachers, a close friend and someone who I regard as one of the foremost Islamic scholars in the West. I've been asking Shaykh Ruzwan Mohammed for this interview for over 6 years, but he's always been hesitant. I'm not sure exactly why, but I think it's because he loves to discuss ideas and thoughts and doesn't really like to talk too much about his own personal life. I'm glad he eventually did agree because I think it's inspiring for others to hear the origin stories of our Islamic scholars and teachers. Shaykh Ruzwan is from Glasgow, so we got to know each other just before he left for his further studies abroad in the 1990s. As he was about to return back to Glasgow in the 2000s, I would hear anecdotes from other UK students studying in the Middle East of Shaykh Ruzwan's scholarship, and I asked him about some of these in the interview, but he is too humble to say much in this regard. So I'll let you make your own conclusions. In the interview, he does reveal some aspects of his past that I've never heard before, particularly including his life growing up in Glasgow. It's amazing to hear how a young boy who struggled to read went on to devise a groundbreaking Islamic Studies program, which has taught over 7,000 students in 15 cities and now teaches across the world online. From what I've heard, the iSyllabus program is unique because it has a high percentage rate of students that actually complete the year-long diploma, as well as the more advanced courses, and that's very different to other short courses in other institutions. His Desert Island Gems are beautiful ones that give you a glimpse into his personality. I do hope you enjoy listening. It is a longer interview, so you may wish to listen in parts, but for me it was well worth the wait. Can I also ask you for a favour before you leave? Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment on Apple Podcasts because it helps other people find our content. Inshallah, this will benefit us and those that listen. I've also started a newsletter which you can sign up to via the website, and I hope you do benefit from that. So until next time, I hope you enjoy the episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Thank you so much for agreeing to do today's podcast on the Desert Island Gems. It's only taken at least 6 years, I think, to get you to agree. So thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion, particularly because I guess I was in the fortunate position to know you before you became a sheikh. So I think our paths crossed initially when we were at Glasgow University. I think you had just left actually. So we'll come on to some of that, but I think you've had a really fascinating journey, which I think can be inspiring for many people, inshallah, and we'll cover through some of these gems that you've got. As you know, we cast away the guests to a desert island, and with them they take these gems, which can be Quranic verses, hadith, poetry, etc., that they would take with them, that would remind them about important parts of their life. So really looking forward to coming on to that. But I'd like to start at the beginning, and I guess your early life and childhood. Can you kind of summarize or give an insight in terms of what your early life was like growing up in Glasgow, probably just not far from where we are just now, and what are your kind of memories growing up? What was the household like? What was the family life like?
Well, I mean, I'm sitting in an office which is in the middle of Maryhill, Great Western Road, Glasgow. So if I look out the window, I can see a place where I played football, had street fights, and all sorts of memories come. I was cycling here and I saw somebody from my school, so somebody from 32 years ago I'd met in the street just minutes ago. And so, I'm here and I'm very much aware of the fact that I'm a product of the kind of environment, the culture, the family setting within which I experienced life at the beginning. And it was a very stable, loving family setup. My father had a number of shops, so I used to help my father in that in my early years, all the way up until secondary school, finishing secondary school in fact. And it was interesting that I'm teaching my son how to read, and my mother was watching me and she was saying, "You're being a bit too harsh." And I said, "No, I'm not." And she says, "Yeah, well, you couldn't read properly until you were like 14. And actually my daughters were watching this conversation, and I said, and she reminded me of the fact that I used to make up the inventory for the shop. So the inventory, taking a list of what was in the shop, what needed to be purchased. And I this is really, really funny actually. Uncle Ben's, it's the rice, isn't it? Yeah. So I thought they were Uncle Beans. So that's how bad it was when I was like 14. So you can imagine, as we Googled it, Uncle Beans, and funnily enough, it doesn't exist anymore. It's Ben's, because Uncle Ben, has racist overtones.
So they've changed it.
Yes, they've changed the name. So I was talking about the kind of reason why they've changed the name, and then my mother was saying, well, you should have studied much better when you were younger. In fact, my early life in school specifically was very much about underachievement. Up until 14, I was not somebody that read or took education seriously at all.
And when you say difficulty reading, you mean in terms of something formal like dyslexia or anything, or do you mean just you didn't pay attention in classes?
I don't know, because even now,
did you read novels and Roald Dahl and stuff?
No, nothing at all. No, I think I can't remember any book I read until I was like 14, 15. And even now, people say I've got a photographic memory. It's not. I mean, I need to read things. Sometimes I'm on a paragraph for like 10, 20 minutes. A sentence, sometimes I'm looking at it. And I think when I was studying Islamic Studies, that was something that was actually something our scholars, our teachers wanted to encourage, that you actually ponder over what you're reading. So I kind of used that to my advantage. So it was like 14-year-old. I remember my father went into school for the parents' evening, and they realised that I wasn't getting forwarded for the O-level examination in English. And this was roughly at the prelim period, like I think it was like November, December. And my father kind of said, no, you need to put him forward for the exam. And obviously I was in the foundational class in English, which means that you're not really taught anything. And so my father says, no, he's going to be put forward for the exam. So my name was put forward, I failed it. So O-level English, I failed.
Okay.
But then the next year, I think I got a B, and then I got an A in, I think, higher. So at that point, I spoke to my English teacher and said, well, what can I do? And she said, well, you need to read much more. And I said, okay. And I started to buy the Sunday Times, the newspaper. It's this massive tome. And it helped English, but it also opened your horizons to the fact that the world isn't just Glasgow. It's not just the west end of Glasgow. And I went to nursery in the same block where, you know, my parents lived, and the primary school was round the corner, the secondary school was round the corner. The university, eventually went to Glasgow University first of all, was around the corner. They're all in the same place. And, you know, reading about different cultures, the travel section, for example, and you see people living in different cultures, having different experiences, it dawned on me the fact that reading is so important, so powerful, that, you know, there's a whole world that's closed off from you if you can't read things, you can't accumulate knowledge from other people's experiences. And that was a life changer, I think. Just one teacher advising, and that's the thing about teachers. I mean, I have a lot of respect for teachers. I think it's under emphasized that teachers change lives, and you know, a teacher that opens a student's eyes up to the wider environment within which they live, the impact that they can make, is far more important than anybody else, I think, in our community. Which is why the Prophet ﷺ was called a mu'allim. He was essentially, you know, it's a nasheed. Mu'allim, it's what his famous Sami Yusuf. But essentially, Mu'allim is just, you know, the most important quality of the Prophet. Not the most, but it's one of the most important. No, in fact, it is the most. He was sent as a teacher and a murabbi. And the reason why that's so important is it sets people on a path that changes them and then changes society as well.
And maybe we'll touch on some of these, but I guess thinking back when, you know, that pre-14, you know, in primary school, and I mean, what was kind of your day-to-day life like? What were you doing? And what was your family like? Was it quite a religious family?
My father, my family, I mean, I met my uncle a couple of days ago. He was so engrossed in dhikr walking down Great Western Road that he just ignored me. And then I kind of had to like look at him, and he turned around and he met somebody else with me as well. And then we, you know, did salam and things. So my father's side is very, very kind of, I would say, connected to the spiritual aspects of Islam, and my house was a place where many scholars frequented. My father was very hospitable.
Because he was very involved in the mosque. And
he was, you know, I've got some of his books. He passed away, rahimahullah, in 2016, and I've got a lot of his books here, you know, and he used to read a lot. And I realised that, you know, even though when he was in the shop, I realised after he passed away, there's a book he used to have behind him, and when there was no customers coming, he would open it up. It was actually a book in Arabic grammar. So he was kind of self-taught Arabic as well. So, I mean, apart from that, his kind of moral outlook on life was something that impacted me a lot. He had this thing that you had to be principled. It doesn't matter what happens. It's kind of very old school idea of what's right and what's wrong. And he would speak the truth. And I remember there was a khutbah in one of the local mosques here, and the khatib was talking about some historical issue to do with Sayyidina Muawiyah radiyallahu anhu, and he said something. My father stood up in the middle of the khutbah and he says, "You've made a mistake and you've disrespected a companion of the Prophet ﷺ." And he told him what happened. My dad just gave him this whole sequence of what actually happened in what he was narrating. So I was looking at my father thinking, my goodness, there's like 400 people in this room. Nobody stood up, and I thought that's a good thing to do. Like, to stand up like that, yeah.
Like, was your dad from, like, was it like a religious lineage, or was he kind of self-taught, or where did he get that kind of?
I mean, no, my father was in the police in Pakistan before he came, the Karachi cops.
Was he?
So yeah, he was of that kind of, you can see the demeanour, that kind of tough demeanour. No, I think it was just the general trend of pietistical association with scholars and respect for scholars and love of the Prophet ﷺ. Very much, something that's part of a lot of our families anyway. And that was inbuilt, must be from his parents, and he wasn't formally trained in Islamic studies, didn't, rudimentaries, but, he was literate in that way that he wanted to inculcate within ourselves love of our deen. And he was the person that gave me my first book in Islam, which I didn't read for 2 years, by Shaykh Khalid al-Naqshbandi, a very famous Kurdish revivalist of the 19th century. And he gave me that, and at that point I wasn't, obviously. If you're in Glasgow and you're involved in other things, let's just say, it's not up there in the list of priorities, especially if you can't read properly and you kind of have a problem explaining to your parents that, oh, I know you've given me this book, but you just get pulled up in this whole thing of where your friends are, where society is, and these things are put in the back burner, and you realise that later on. You regret it, but you don't, because you know that everything comes at the right time.
And do you think there was any indications at that time that you were going to pursue a career or future in Islamic scholarship, learning, etc.? Was there anything in your primary or in high school that was indicating that, or what trajectory were you on at that point, do you think?
No, I think there was the opposite, because I remember when I was like 10, 11, a lot of scholars used to come to the house. There's one specific scholar used to come, and he's set up lots of institutions and charitable endowments, and he used to come, and I used to kind of be there in the background, serving food and things. And he used always to say, for the next 5 years, he used to ask my father, where's your son? Like, he would have to make excuses. And so it was only and then when I was 16 that I kind of reappeared, 16, 17 that I reappeared. And I think it was to do with a lot of things. I think there was this idea that I wasn't happy with the fact that I was restricting myself to the experiences that people in the West End, in the west of Glasgow, you have Rangers, Celtic, Catholic, Protestant. I was kind of involved as an honorary Catholic, involved in street violence. Do you understand? So once you get involved in that, one fight leads to another fight, and the next fight is bigger than the previous fight. And before you know it, you're getting to situations where, now looking back, you're thinking, am I so insignificant that I'm going to, end up another statistic? A lot of my friends ended up, in very serious situations. In fact, when I came back from Syria, I met one of my friends here, again, Great Western Road. He's got a shop here, and he said, oh, did you not hear about such and such a school? He did, I didn't realise what he did. He went into a church in London, naked, and he had a sword, and he attacked people, and this was famous apparently and when I came back, he said, well, they were asking his school friends what happened and all the rest of it. And then I Googled up, and I just realised, a lot of the friends that I had at that point ended up in very, very difficult, traumatic stories for themselves and their families. And, praise Allah that you kind of pulled yourself out, or somebody pulled yourself out. Somebody pulled you out of that situation, because it's nonsensical, meaning it's not something that you think through, especially if in the midst of it. And one of the blessings of being in a community like Glasgow is that there's lots of people that throw out lifelines for people. And one of those was Javed Ali. This building is run by Javed Ali, Andalus, and he used to organise circles and things. And at one of the circles, they were talking about taking a retreat or a journey to Turkey. So they had, I think I was about 17 at the time, in 1989, I think, in summer. And so, because a couple of my friends at school were going, they said, why don't you come? I went to Istanbul, and all of a sudden that whole thing of reading the Sunday Times and travelling, it became real, because from not leaving Glasgow for the whole of my life to all of a sudden being in a different country and realising that Islam has built some of the most amazing civilizational structures and institutions and nations, civilizational structures are unparalleled. The idea of identity became very interesting for me, that I'm not just somebody who's defined by being from the west coast of Scotland, involved in gang violence and the Catholic Protestant kind of skirmishes. I'm part of something far bigger, and the thing that I'm involved in, connected to, which is far bigger, is actually a belief system which I was wondering about then. I was thinking, well, I need to think about this. I need to look into this. While doing other things, it was something in the back of my mind, and I started to, read about Islam. The Mitchell Library, which is here, I started to go there. I remember this before internet. This is 1989, and so I went into the library, and the majority of the books there were about Sufism, Islamic history and Sufism. So I kind of went through the books, read them. It went to the last years of my schooling, and I was kind of caught because I had this kind of past, which was always part of me, but you didn't want to be part of it. So you're kind of slowly untangling yourself towards the end of my school years from that. And then by, the end of the schooling, 6th year, I'd kind of decided it wasn't, I wanted to be serious about studying, and I went to university and developed.
And that change in your teens, do you think that was there like a singular moment or a point that you remember, actually, no, this is where I'm going to change, or was it more a gradual, drip, drip, drip? And
it was very gradual, very gradual, and it was lots of things. There was somebody, I don't know who this is, but somebody said this really deep thing, that the definition of a disbeliever, a kafir, is a person that thinks that the world is conspiring against them. And the definition of a believer is a person that thinks that the world and the universe is conspiring for them, conspiring for you. And I definitely think there's so much wisdom. Whoever said it, kudos. This is such a deep, deep statement, because there's so many small things that happen that, if I think back, I've not really sat and thought, well, at what point? There's lots of things. In fact, you were at a lecture last week, Dr. Salahuddin Arkadan. I met him first in 1990. He was doing his PhD. So this is right at that point when I'm like 16, 17. And I think Javed had invited him to give a talk, and he gave, he mentioned something which is actually my first gem, which is, he mentioned the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The warrior, the brave person is not the one that, wins in battle or wins in wrestling, but the one that controls their anger at the point that they're angry. عند الغضب. And I was thinking, okay, I'm going to try that out. Because this is at the midst of when I'm just like coming back from a fight, sitting in this halaqah, listening to this Lebanese sheikh, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to try this. And, in the midst of a street fight, can I control my anger? And it was so difficult. It was just so difficult. And I thought the Prophet ﷺ, who I identify as being my prophet, has said something that has proved to me that I am so weak. Even though at the point where you feel that you have so much strength and youth and vigor and heroism and all the rest of it, that's not heroism. And so that change of perspective was humbling, and it was also challenging, because it gave you a goal to aim towards. And then, by that time I started to think, well, the whole kind of look into Islam needed to be much more serious. And at that point I started to read a lot. I read, I remember one of the Ramadans, I think it was 16, 17, I came to the Carrington Street Mosque here. Again, this is like, 2 minutes away? Went to the
everything's within 1 or 2 miles of it.
It's really strange. Went to and Brother Ishaq was there in his bookshop, and I said, I need that book, Ihya Ulumuddin. So he got it. It's 4-volume, the old, butchered edition. It's like the edition that doesn't make any sense. So in Ramadan, I think in 17 days, I finished the whole thing. And it was actually not healthy. Thinking back, it wasn't healthy to read without having somebody advising you on what to read. Because if you read it from beginning to end and you try and apply it, it is very unhealthy spiritually. And not meaning that Ihya Ulumuddin is not a book that you use, but to use books which are written for a different time and place, and try and apply them without any context and without any filter actually can damage your health. I realised that. I started to eat very little, and started to sleep very, a couple of hours in the day, trying to practice the things that were said. This great saint did this, and this great saint did that, and you were thinking, well, not looking at the general picture, but looking at the fact that you want to actually apply everything. Walking in the desert for 40 days and all this thing. You think, mashallah, how? Obviously, in the context of the hadith, like controlling your nafs, and I'm going to Mitchell Library, all the books are on Sufism, you were thinking, okay, this is what I need to do. So I was kind of in a very strange situation where, it's pre-internet, any prominent English-speaking scholars. You have to essentially make sense of it and wait for people to come to the city and speak about it. People speak about Islam face to face. Cassette players, you would get some lectures on cassettes, but not much. So at that point, I was consuming a lot. I was reading a lot, and having not read, and then reading a lot, made me kind of probably antisocial in some ways. I spoke very little, reclusive, I would say as well. So all those things, were part and parcel of everything slowing down. In fact, another thing was I injured myself in my last year at school, damaged my ligament playing rugby, and I was in crutches for like the last, I think, 6 weeks of school. Just when you're ready to party and all the rest of it, you're in crutches and you can't do much. And then that continued in my first year at university. The operation went wrong and I was in crutches for majority of my first year at university as well. And so all that meant that, you need to sit down and read. You need to sit down and reflect. And that's a blessing. The fact that you think it's not a blessing, thinking back, thinking back, that's probably a blessing, because everything just slowed down just at the moment where I needed to slow everything down. My last year at school, getting injured. I used to play sports for hours on end, like we're talking about 9-10 hours a day. But that all disappeared.
No, because you were a really good footballer as well, from what people used to... You're a really keen footballer. And
yeah, keen, I would say good.
Well, I think you're a hacker, weren't you?
Yeah, it's a colloquial term for fighting while you're playing football.
But I think there's so much in what you were just saying, and I think, it's interesting, just even the first gem that you mentioned about anger. I guess, you would have heard so many different reminders and talks even at your dad's house with these scholars, but it was the right thing at the right time that resonated with you, which is significant. But also, I think people forget, particularly people that are growing up a lot later on, is that you're talking about consuming the books and going to the bookshop locally at the mosque. We don't really have many people that would guide us or access to people, because painting a picture in those days, I remember the issues were, well, actually a lot of the learned scholars and imams, they didn't speak English, and that was a big issue back in particularly around the 90s. You don't have the internet, you don't have, so that idea of to calibrate or to kind of benchmark, well, and books there weren't loads either in English, so it's kind of, you had a small pool of stuff that you could go into. But I guess one bit that I'm interested in from what you're saying is really this idea that no one's born a scholar. People sometimes forget that, is that, they see the end product, and the people that have, taken many of your lessons and you've taught over the years, and it's about 7,000 people you've taught in 15 cities through iSyllabus since 2009, which we'll talk a bit about. But that idea that people always have that potential to change and potential to turn things around, and I think sometimes people feel, well, if I never had that when I was growing up, then it was never going to happen, and I think that, your own example, certainly signifies.
Even that thing about turning it around, I've never kind of spoken about it. I mean, I'm sure not many people know about that, but that's, and I don't make a big thing about it. But if you're thinking back, now that you asked it, it is kind of interesting that, by the time I was like 14, 15, I was finding it difficult to read. And then it's the whole thing, Shaykh, you're kind of gifted from the beginning. And even now I find it difficult reading. I have to concentrate, and that's, it's a struggle, but with the struggle you get the benefits as well. So,
but you're one of the person that's read the most whenever I come to your house, or you've got piles of books and stuff. And I remember asking you, how do you get through all these books? Which we'll maybe come on to, because there's a few questions about your kind of periods of learning, which I'm fascinated about. So I guess moving on then, so we come up to kind of the early 90s, and you go to Glasgow University and you study geography or geopolitics and Arabic. What were uni days like? Why did you study that? What was your kind of intention?
I was happy I got into university. Right. So it was, Well, I wasn't happy. I just got into university. I remember I was sent the degree. When was it? I sent the confirmation. I was in London, and it wasn't a big thing to me. You know, the fact that I got in. You know, while you're doing it, you don't read too much into it. You go into university and you're thinking, what am I interested in? I was interested in geography. At school, I was, you know, a good teacher. We had a good teacher who kind of showed us the importance of his subject, which was geography, and it was interesting because it was talking about politics. It was talking about resources, debt, and these are all things that interested me because I was interested in how the world worked. Reading the Sunday Times, obviously, everything's there, and you see injustices and you see inequalities, and you're thinking, why do they exist? And you know, geography was for me and geopolitics was a perfect inroad into that. And you know, the first year majority of it was I was in crutches, and because I was in crutches, it meant that I had a lot of time to read, not just for the courses I was doing, but also my interest in Islam meant that, you know, the Mitchell Library had Islamic history, it had Sufism, it didn't have much on general Islam. And so I think at that time it was level 8 in the Glasgow University Library, where I used to sit and study for my own studies there, but also read systematically, going through all the works on Islam. And there was fascinating works from 1870s translated, you know, the Minhaj of Imam Nawawi, you know, translated from the French to the English, and all these kind of things. Like you were thinking, how did the Europeans just map out the whole of human civilization by studying it minutely? It was just so fascinating. And it wasn't just Islam, it was every single culture that was there. You go around the corner and there was Aboriginal cultures, and dissecting every single thing about their culture, their language, their rituals. I was thinking, what's the purpose? The purpose is obviously, now we know it's about power. You have to map everything out to know exactly what you're dealing with. But through that, I kind of ended up systematically going through all the works there on political Islam, on Islamic history, on theology, and I became self-taught, literate in the Islamic sciences, and I understood, you know, all the things I talk about now, my kind of backdrop of, you know, Islamic theology, history, law, the madhabs. A lot of it is actually from that period.
Before you went abroad?
Well before. So at the point I'd left, it was almost a disadvantage knowing the kind of intricacies of what Western scholars have said about Islamic history and the origins of the seerah and hadith criticism, because I've kind of gone through the broad strokes of that narrative anyway. In fact, when I was at Glasgow University, we studied Hagerism. You know, one of the books was I think Patricia Crone, who wrote this thesis about the origin of Islam actually being a Jewish sect. So it was Hagerism, not Islam. And you know, these are theories that are discredited. In fact, Patricia Crone herself withdrew that thesis, the whole idea that Islam came from it, because it didn't make any sense. But that's the level to which, you know, the reading kind of became quite broad, and at that point, you know, my interest in Arabic became much more serious as well. I remember, you know, thinking whether to continue just with geography or whether to kind of go into the Arabic, and I just thought, like, there's a limit to how much you can read in English. You need to get to the sources, and that's, you know, that's kind of next step that I took, a very conscious step to say that I need to, you know, delve into Arabic and really take it seriously.
What was your kind of career path at that point? Did you think, well, when I finish uni, what am I going to get as a job? Or what were you kind of, when you're doing that degree at Glasgow University, what were you thinking what was the future going to hold for you?
Did you see me? You can remember what I looked like? If you saw what I looked like, you would say this person's never going to get a job. Because I had no idea about getting, I just didn't even think about it. It didn't even cross my path.
You weren't bothered about it?
I didn't even think about it, to be honest. I just thought, I'm in university, there's all these books, and I'm just going to keep reading. Yeah. And, you know, the whole thing of career path. And in fact, the reason my father came when I was 14 to the school is because I didn't have a guidance teacher who, you know, guides your studies. So they say, okay, what do you want to be? You need to do this and that. I didn't get that. And that's what precipitated my father going to the school and saying, my son saying, well, all his other friends have had, you know, okay, if you want to be a doctor, you need to get A, all this. He's not even had this. If he missed it, he said, no, he's not going to be setting some of the exams. So, and I just realised, like, there's people that trickle through the educational system quietly just disappearing into the underbelly of society, because the education system, I think it streamlines producing people for employment, and obviously the people that don't get through that system obviously have to do other jobs. Let's just say
It's one of the good fortune you had of your dad who went along to that parents' evening, or went approached the school or pushed for you to get your O grade or whatever, and sit through.
It was
a lot of people don't have that.
Yeah, I think it was more like, okay, not that he can do it, but you shouldn't just give up on him. It was that you're in charge of his education. If he's not doing, then pull him up or whatever. I mean, my father would have said, look, he will do the work. I'll make sure he does the work. And unfortunately, you don't have that input from parents.
Okay. So, did you get involved with the Islamic Society and at Glasgow Uni, or were you quite a recluse, or what you?
No. The Glasgow University. I think my last year at university, we revived GUMSA, the Glasgow University Muslim Students Association. Myself and a friend, Zahid Hanif, did a very bad job of it, but we claim to fame is that we did revive it. I think we did like one event or something. I've still got, in fact, in my all my documents and I've still got application forms and all these kind of things.
Because I started a couple of years later, after you would have left, and GUMSA, the Islamic Society, was pivotal in my uni years actually. So
I think it went through a metamorphosis. I mean, university ISOCs, students associations are really active now. I think they do monumental work. I think, given the kind of, especially in terms of what other societies do, given what they have and given their other kind of priorities, I think they're pivotal to our kind of social life in the UK specifically. I know that they really produce a whole group of leaders for ourselves and create some kind of impetus for movements.
So, take us to your second gem that you're going to take on this island.
My second gem is actually, it's in that period of Arabic. My first class was meeting my first proper Arabic tutor. No, in fact, it's not my first. Before I come to that, the end of the first year at university, I decided I need to go into Arabic. I want to make that part of my degree. So I went to London. To study Arabic. It was a 2-month course in London, run by the Muslim Institute. These famous people that set up the Islamic Parliament, Khalim Siddiqui. So they had, So this whole thing of my first year at university, I was like obviously looking for people speaking about Islam, and Khalim Siddiqui came up a number of times, trying to create this kind of momentum for a Islamic Parliament, Muslim Parliament in the UK. So I got involved in that, and then they had this Arabic course. I went down, and one of my teachers was Mohammed Abu Layla, rahimahullah. He was an Azhari. He was the head of Kulliyat al-Din in Azhar. But he was kind of a replacement for the Arabic teacher who'd become ill, and they brought him in. He was an Arabic teacher. In fact, our 8 weeks was him telling us about his life story and all his kind of escapades while studying. And this is a man, if you think of it, like the glasses are like thicker than any glasses you've ever seen. And telling us about the fact that he, rather than taking the bus, he would spend the money for the bus on a book and walk the 7 hours to school or something. So we ended up doing really badly in Arabic. But, when I finished it, he said, you have to take me as your sheikh. So during that period, 2 months, I ended up like kind of, meeting a lot of Islamic groups and things in London. But then it came back to Glasgow University, transferred to doing the Arabic course as well. And the second gem is from that period. James Montgomery, Professor James Montgomery, I now know is in Cambridge University teaching a professor of Arabic Studies. And the reason he's part of this is because, at that period of my time, Arabic became a passion. And what I remember about him is that he has a very broad Scottish accent. And he used to teach us poetry. So he used to teach us Aritha and all the different categories of Arabic poetry. And he's doing this broad Scottish accent. And he's published a couple of books on Antara. And this is Mu'allaqat. So later on, when I went to study in the Middle East, in Mahad al-Fath and other places, literature, when I used to read it, I used to remember him. I remember the fact that he instilled within me the love of the Arabic language. Because I remember I asked him, said, how long is it going to take me to learn Arabic? He said, 20 years. And people nowadays say, well, it's a year to study the 6 levels and you're fine and you can read anything you want. I realised he knew more about Arabic than anybody else, because what he said is true. The Arabic language is so deep that even a master of Arabic language has to consult the dictionaries to make any sense of some of the literature that we have. So
this is in London he's teaching you, or this is back in...
This in Glasgow.
Glasgow.
James Montgomery, he was teaching there 91, 1991, 92.
And he's a Muslim?
I have no idea. I mean...
he was traditionally an Orientalist, wasn't he?
Yeah, Antara, he's done all this stuff on poetry. And one of the lines was, I would love to وددت تقبيل السيوف لأنها لمعت. He said, like, Antara is famous for war poetry. He says, وددت تقبيل السيوف لأنها لمعت. He said, I would love to kiss the swords, for they remind me of the shining of your teeth when you smile. So even in the midst of war, all he can think of is from the sparks from the swords. All he remembers is his beloved and her teeth as they sparkle. So I was thinking, like, Arabic language is so deep, the metaphor and the similes, and he would kind of instill that within us because he was a master of the Arabic language. Poetry, classical poetry. This is Mu'allaqat. Antara ibn Shaddad is from the poems that they used to, said that they used to hammer onto the Kaaba because of their eloquence. And for me that was an interesting period because, the time I was studying Arabic at Glasgow University, also Professor John Mattick, very famous Arabist, under whom Salahuddin Arkadan did his PhD. He was here for his PhD. He was also one of these old school academics. And so when we studied Arabic, it wasn't the modern Arabic, it was the kind of classical system of learning the grammar and then doing study texts on classical Arabic works and translating them. And it was kind of completely different from how Arabic's taught now. It's all about buying potatoes and, purchasing this and doing that. Then it was all academic.
And did you learn that did it come quite naturally to you when you threw yourself into the Arabic, or did you have to grind, and was it hard, or was it something that you just, because there is those things, that some things that you're good at or take naturally, they become a lot easier and you can do it, and some subjects which some people's bit of their brains they find a lot more challenging. Was it something naturally that you were drawn to and found easier to learn?
It was not easy, and it was definitely not something given, God-given, let's just say. It was something that requires patience and perseverance. And I realised that when I started to compare myself with other people, that I could see studying and memorising. I was a Mahad al-Fath, and we used to have a Quran, we used to hifz, and then we used to have to recite the Quran. And there's like 60 people in our specific halaqa, and then the teacher would say, okay, start the page that you're supposed to have memorised. And then some of the Arab students at the front, like Algerians and Moroccans, they would, their turn would be the end. So it'd go through, and by about 40 minutes you'd be at the front. And they'd say, okay, what do we need to memorise? They'd get the Mus'haf out. And they hadn't memorised the page. And within like 7 minutes they've memorised the page. And that page, I would have started 2 weeks ago. I had to prepare it like 2 weeks in advance to get it. Yeah. So then I realised, look, oh my goodness. And when you realise that, you're thinking, is it worth it? So all through that period I was thinking, if I'm not gifted in this, should I just give up? Meaning, and I was mistaken, gifted meaning having a memory which is quick. And I thought, no, because when we're asked to deliver, I can do as well as these people that are very, very sharp in terms of memory. But perhaps in terms of understanding, they're not. It's something, if you're given something, that may be, balancing something else that you're not given. And so definitely Arabic language, any language in fact, is not something I'm gifted with.
I've asked you this before, but do you have a photographic memory?
Absolutely. The whole point is no.
No, but then
I have to sit and watch.
I've seen, cause I've obviously spoken to a number of people I've studied, and sometimes even doing like radio shows and things in the past, and they'll come with their books and they'll okay, pick that one, or they'll revise that for a week or two. And I've seen people will, you almost pluck out, well, I remember this book and then this quote, and it's almost it's deeply ingrained, right? And it's
it was deeply ingrained doesn't mean it was photographic. I mean, the whole point is
how have you how did you, how were you able to kind of consume that? Because there are so many, over the years consistently, people will ask you questions or references, and you'll, I mean, even in these books in this room, I've heard anecdotes of people who have said, well, you'll quote and then you'll just pick a book and say, oh yeah, I did this 20 years ago and haven't looked at it since, but it's almost word for word. So for a layperson, I mean, how does that happen? How do you explain that? Have you been able to do that?
Well, it's ingrained, but it's ground into that. You're ground into the fact that it's ingrained. You have to apply yourself. And I could take a book from a large collection and know the volume, kind of roughly know which page to open it, and the masla is there. When you're engaged in that kind of, deeply engaged in that, then it becomes natural. You know a book, you know the chapters, you know the kind of volumes, and you know roughly where that would be discussed, and you kind of, within a page or two you'll get it. But that's based upon constant practice and application, and that's time. So it's not the fact that I've opened a book up and I know the page, but now I do. Like, there's books that I've studied, I know the page and where the issue is, and I can see exactly where it is. But it's not photographic. That's because I've sat there, went through it word for word, and then I've summarised it, and I've made a mind map of it, or I've created, everything I studied I rewrote and reformatted, and got lots of resources here which are essentially my notes. Every book was rewritten and reformatted, and so it becomes ingrained because you've taken ownership of it. And in the Middle East, the whole system is based upon learning poems, which encapsulate the sciences. I used to memorize the poems, but then understand the poems on my own terms. And so when I remember issues, it's based on the fact that I've internalized the poem and its content and its kind of context, and that requires work. I was telling my daughter actually just last week that how I used to study, and I used to say that before the exams, especially in the Middle East, I never studied like a week before the exam. I didn't touch a book, because you should have it ready well before you're asked about it. So yeah, about a week before the exam period in like Mahad al-Fajr, for example, I didn't touch any of the books, because you have to be ready for it, well in advance. But other students, it was the day before, they would be memorizing. But did they continue internalizing? I don't think so.
And that probably takes us quite well to one of the other gems which you've got from a line of poetry. We're changing the order a wee bit, but do you want to mention that one? Because I think that probably fits in quite well with...
Which one's this?
The fourth...
Okay, Al-Mutanabbi. Yeah, so this is an interesting one. This is Mutanabbi. In fact, this is in the midst of my studies in Damascus. This was Abu Ubaidah Umar al-Misri, Hafidhahullah, taught us Arabic language, taught us fiqh, usul. Somebody I considered to be like my father. A lot of my teachers I considered like my father in terms of their concern for us. And he was an amazing, is still an amazing man. I remember when I graduated, I gave him one of my Batan Shawwal Kamises, from the northeastern province, because my father brought it. It was like a big woolly thing. He used to complain about the cold. He was very old, and he couldn't keep too well. So I gave him this, and I used to wear it after I'd graduated. But he was somebody that had this quality that almost all of our teachers had, which is that they taught. But with the teaching was this instilling of concern for the students and their welfare, and asking them to go above and beyond. And I remember this was something he mentioned at the beginning of when we were studying commercial law, fiqh al-buyu', and he was just basically telling people, get ready, you have to apply yourself. He said, لا تحسبن المجد تمرة أنت آكلها. Do not consider علم, he said, لا تحسبن العلم تمرة أنت آكلها. Do not consider knowledge to be like a date, a fruit that you take, pluck and you eat. لن تنال المجد or علم حتى تلعق الصابرة. You will never attain to knowledge until you have to chew on cactus. In other words, it's not an easy task. But when I was reading it, I thought it didn't sound right. And what he'd done is he'd changed the words. Knowledge, because Al-Mutanabbi is talking about grandeur and valor and courage and success. His word was all about courage. He was kind of prompting the sultans and the khalifas to fight and be to have valor in fighting. And he's basically saying you'll never attain to victory and success until you go through difficulties. When my teacher was saying that, he was speaking to me, because I was looking around and thinking, all these people, they're really quick-witted and their memory is fantastic. It must be about me. And in fact, I remember I got really good marks in his usul exam, and he read them out, and I think one of the students said, why did he get all that good mark? And he said, well, he's got glasses on. He just said, none of your business. Do you think he got it because his glasses were nice? So, our teachers had our back, but they had the back for everybody. So this is the thing that, with study, they knew it was difficult, and they knew they had to train us up to represent our faith and to really, take the knowledge and the kind of this kind of impetus forward. And they realised that a lot of people dropped out. I remember when I was there, we'd always get Westerners enrolling into the course in Mahad al-Fath, and by the first year they dropped out because it was tough. In fact, up until I got to, I think, 6th year, there wasn't a week where I thought, okay, this is the week I'll just say, okay, it was good, I'll just pack it in. So it was physically difficult. I mean, in fact, my 5th year, at the end of my 5th year, I couldn't continue into my 6th year because I had really excruciating back pain. I had slipped disc, and sitting for 7 hours a day was just not possible. I went to see the Mudir, Abdul Fattah, and I said to him, look, can I get dispensation to X, Y, and Z? And he said, no, you can't. If you can't sit and you can't attend the class, you cannot continue. And that's it. He just said that. He didn't give me any alternatives. And so I had to leave. So the year that I left, I stayed in Damascus. I revised and I taught. So I taught people in the Mahad all the content that I'd studied for the 5 years up until that time. Again, it was an amazing blessing because it gave me time to revise, to teach, to study extra classes outside the Mahad as well. Then I came to the 6th year, alhamdulillah, I was a bit more able to attend the classes, so finished. And it was that fact that so many people give up. And yet, glory, knowledge, all these things are not something that you can attain to just by sitting back and imagining. That's why a lot of people nowadays think, they want to do a bit of part-time study, and then they want to start giving a very serious religious advice. It's not how it works. You have to have the skin in the game. You have to have put something into it to be able to understand how difficult this is.
It's an interesting parallel, isn't it, in terms of, because I know your back injury troubled you for many years, even when you came back to the UK. But it kind of parallels or mirrors, I guess, the ligament injury you had at university as well. At Glasgow University, in terms of, is that point where maybe you need to slow down or let it kind of reconfigures where you're going a wee bit, and maybe down the line that is something that then did benefit you. I'm interested in this, in the next kind of few questions is around this aspect of your studying abroad, and you've touched upon that already. Most of that I think was in Damascus. Tell us about this institute, because I think that is so formative in terms of where you were and your journey to there, I guess, because you'd been to different places. You went to Turkey initially, and then some other places. I mean, I'm just thinking in those days, again, you would have been one of the few people that we knew from Scotland or Glasgow that would have left abroad to study. There weren't many, the few brothers that we knew that went, but it wasn't a common thing as it was, particularly in the late 90s, where became quite trendy. Actually, loads of British and Westerners then went. So you, Javed, and some of these people were kind of the early kind of, and Brother Shaukat was, the early people I came across that certainly had gone abroad to study Islamic sciences, which was interesting. Take us from that journey from Glasgow University to then where you went to study in the Islamic world and where you ended up, and really keen to hear a little also about where you ended up in Damascus and the institute and why there and what was unique about it.
I mean, it was not plotted out. There was nothing planned. There was this desire that you've learnt Arabic and and I had this palpable kind of feeling of injustice that also tempered my Islamic studies. The reason why I was interested in Islam wasn't just a spiritual thing. It was a thing that Islam has a lot to say about the world and how the world's ordered. So when I was at university, I was reading a lot of politics, a lot of anarchism, all this kind of stuff. I was kind of reading. When I was saying reading, I was reading not just Islamic things. I was reading lots of things, and when I went abroad, that was part of what I was looking at, injustices, and I was looking at societies and how they're being dismantled from within and from outside. And one of the things I did do is I went back to Turkey for 3 years, and it was partly it was to do with Islamic studies. It was I've had a long-standing love affair with Turkey, just because my first introduction to Islamic civilization
But Turkey wasn't trendy in those days.
It wasn't. And
Turkey was very much looked down upon. Things that were coming out of Turkey was, substandard, etc. Now, I guess,
This is 1989, my first trip to Turkey. Yeah. I went back in 1994 until 1997. And that period was very much, it was tempered with a kind of a political, there was a kind of political aspect to that as well. It was President Erbakan was introducing policies that are now seen to be revolutionary. He was introducing gold and silver currency. He was setting up a commonwealth of Muslim nations, non-Arab Muslim nations as well. And I was fascinated by that because, it wasn't just a spiritual thing. I felt Islam had a lot to give. And that, for me, that moment was very much at the forefront of that. 1997, February 1997, was the kind of what they call the postmodern coup, where he was removed by the army. And I, having spent time with a number of very prominent scholars there at that time, had to leave because, in fact, everybody left. Scholars, great scholars, like one of my teachers, Professor Esad Joshan, he left as well. He was, people say, assassinated in Australia in a car crash. He was targeted. So there's all these things happening, and I was kind of left. I remember this was in the midst of, I can't remember what month it was, but it was very cold. I had this kind of very flimsy raincoat, and I was sitting in Fatih thinking about where to go to study. And I wanted to go to Syria. It was like I wanted to go, but I'd been refused an entry visa from Istanbul. So I was sitting in Fatih in Çarşamba. Çarşamba is the kind of, now people know about it. I was sitting in the burek parlour where you have burek, which is like kind of pastry. I was sitting there having tea, and then somebody walked in, ginger beard. He looked, could have been Turkish, but he wasn't. He started, ordered something. I could tell he wasn't Turkish. He spoke, and I sat next to him and said, okay. Ended up being an American convert, travelling around the Middle East, and I still don't know who he is. And I said, I'm in this situation where I need to, I wanted to go to Syria, it's blocked. And he says, yeah, it's because of the Kurdish insurgents and this. He knew everything, and I thought, okay. And I said, okay, I just want to go somewhere else. And he said, oh, go to Yemen, go to Tarim. I said, Yemen, I know Yemen, but Tarim? I said, Hadramaut. I said, I know Hadramaut because I studied Arabic, it's always in the grammar books. And then he gave me the name of Habib Umar, Sheikh Habib Umar, Hafidhullah. And so he drew a map. I've still got it on a piece of paper in this cafe in Istanbul. And I was like freezing. He was freezing as well. I gave him my raincoat, by the way, because he looked freezing, more in need of it. He drew this map, get to Sana'a. From Sana'a, it's like a 17-hour taxi drive. Get to Sayoun, and then you'll from there. And when you get to Tarim, which is a city in Hadramaut, ask for Habib Umar, Sheikh Habib Umar, and go, and he'll let you. And this is exactly what I did. Went to the bookshops, got an English version of Lonely Planet, looked up Yemen, looked up the visa requirements, looked up Hadramaut, and I said, okay, it looks doable. And I booked a one-way flight through Egypt to, eventually go to Yemen. But when I got to Egypt, I decided to enroll in Azhar.
Just as you're passing through.
I thought I'm here. I thought maybe this American's he's leading me down a blind alley. So I went to Azhar, enrolled. It took about 4 weeks. It was like a hellish process. Got in, and I think a week into the classes, I just thought, this is not for me. Chain smoking at the doors of the lesson.
Not you.
Not me, but also not Islam. This is not.
Were you chain smoking?
No, not me. No. I mean, I've not smoked for a long time. So
who's chain smoking?
So
the teachers,
students.
The students.
And I can imagine the teachers. And nothing. I'm not saying I'm giving a fatwa here. It's a podcast. But the point is, it wasn't
What you were looking for.
It wasn't what I was looking for, and ended up continuing the journey to Sana'a. I went to Sana'a. Ended up actually staying there for about 6 months, and then I went to Hadramaut. Went through for about a year. Went back to Sana'a. Stayed there for another 4 or 5 months, while getting ill and stuff on the way. And so that journey of study was essentially off the roadmap. And I got to Tarim. There was a brother, Thaqib Mahmoud. He's a sheikh now. He's even though I've not seen him for like 12 years, he's one of the most beloved people to me, because we got to Tarim and we kind of met each other. There was only 2 of us who spoke English, and I said, okay, I'm here to study, and I'm very serious at this point. I'm not like I am now. And I said, we're going to have to speak English for a week, and after that, no English. So we were chit-chatting and getting like off like a house on fire, like really friendly and all the rest of it. He's from London, so we're like chit-chatting and all the rest of it. And then the week passes, and obviously I know what I've said, and that's it, no English. And then I think it created a lot of tension. And he's, mashallah, he's big. And like, if he was in Glasgow, he'd be a tough guy.
Yeah.
Understand? So and I didn't back down.
Okay.
Even though we could have chatted for hours, we were not there to chat.
Yeah.
And amazing memories of that. But to study, so that period studied, alhamdulillah, studied there. He studied as well, but he told me about Mahad al-Fath, because your question is about Mahad al-Fath. That's
So
why
tell us about that. For
yeah.
people that know it,
He
how
said,
would you kind of...
yeah, he said, oh, there's some people in Syria studying, and if you want to go study, okay, there's this place and that place and that, and there's this other place, but it's like, don't like, it's not. It's like, he described it as some kind of citadel, some kind of fortress. Like the way he was talking about it, I thought, what on earth is this? Because he said you can get into here, you can get into there, you can do studies there. Yeah, just do the paperwork. And he kept saying Mahad al-Fath, and I said, okay, no, you won't go there because it's too tough, and they're like, they won't let anybody in, and all that. I was thinking, what on earth is this? So I got to Damascus. I was very ill at this time. I had to go to the UK to sort out my kidneys. This is a kind of side point, okay. Which my parents didn't know I was in Yemen actually at this point as well. So there's a whole issue going on there.
Because I've got just digressing a bit, I've got a number of anecdotes which I was going to fact check with you. And you're talking about illness. Was this anything to do with the Hajj kind of period? No, this is well before.
Well, let's digress and then we'll come back to yours. So one of the anecdotes I heard was you'd left Glasgow and then people hadn't seen you for a number of years and then some of the brothers met you at Hajj.
Oh, this was when I was in Damascus, yeah.
This later on. And they found you lying on the side of the road.
Yeah, let's just say I was lying.
So they're saying,
I was officially a butcher.
So tell us a bit about that, because it was basically some of the West End guys here brought up with you, recognised you lying on the streets in Hajj. So just tell us that anecdote. And
yeah, this was in Damascus. Fast forward a bit, a couple of years into Damascus, I had this urge to go on Hajj. I was with Sheikh Amr, and I was with somebody else he's from just outside Edinburgh, and we were walking past the old citadel in Damascus, and I just got this amazing urge to go on Hajj. And this was like 4 weeks before Hajj season. And by that time, all the kind of visa things were going. And I just started to ask, how can I go on Hajj? I realised it's too late to go through UK. I was a UK citizen, you couldn't go through Syria. So it was like, it's off the table, there's no discussion. But I just kept going to the embassy and speaking to people outside. Once you speak to people outside the embassies, you realise there's an underbelly of official contacts that you can, but you just need to keep coming and meeting people and speaking to people. And in the end, I got this visa as an honorary Syrian butcher, which meant that I was in a taxi driving. But the problem was I couldn't leave Syria with that, because there was all this clamp down on people travelling by land. So I was stuck with a visa, but I wasn't allowed to leave. And so I had to find out, I found a way of getting to Amman and meeting these Syrian butchers in Amman, and they could continue the travels on a taxi. So I ended up going, that's another story. I don't want to go into that, it's like weird. Met them in Amman, and we kind of got to, Mecca just in time for Yom Tarwiyah, which is the day you leave for Mina. And it was a taxi with 4 of us, stopping, like they stopped every half hour for tea. And these are men, these are like people like in their 70s, 60s, 70s, who couldn't slaughter a sheep because they're just not physically able to, but they had visas. And then they would stop every half an hour for a toilet break, obviously, and then drinking tea. And I was thinking we're going to miss the Hajj. And so people talk about patience and Hajj. I learned about it there because I thought these guys just love their tea so much that we're going to miss Hajj. But alhamdulillah, we got there and finished the Hajj. We had no official residence in Mina or Mecca. Even Medina Munawwara, we had nowhere to stay, and I finished the Hajj rites. And I was afterwards, like, after the adrenaline, wears out, you've just finished the whole process. And I was just sitting outside, and then I think it was Faisal. Was it Faisal? Yeah, he just looked at me and I looked at him. I didn't say, look, I need some help, but he kind of took me into the hotel and cleaned me up a bit. So, yeah.
So going back to, okay, you had these kidney stones and that whatever story, and then so you were Damascus then. So you're asking people and...
So Sheikh Thaqib, he kept mentioning it. And then when I got to Damascus, went back to UK, got my visa, went to Damascus 1990, and applied to Mahad al-Fath. I went there and had a look. And it was interesting because the first day there was like 3,000 people attending to apply for the first year, and it was a surreal experience because the Mudir, Sheikh Abdul Fattah Bizam, he basically had everyone lined up in batches of like 500, just walking past and touching them, saying, next, you can go into the next phase. Is it like, I've not watched Hunger Games, but I can imagine this is like he was onto something. So he would just touch someone on the it's almost like he's saying this person's of the right material.
And how would he know? What was the...
I have no idea. So this is like, I need to ask him at some point. And then...
So this was picking who was going to get entry into...
Not entry, this is getting to the next stage.
The assessment process. Yeah,
so then checking who you are, and do you have a family of scholars and all the rest of it. And then after that you'd have a written test, and then, there was kind of 3 processes. And then in the end, alhamdulillah, I found myself in the first year. I'm just thinking, what on earth am I doing here with like 90 people in a small room? The heat and the places where you sit are so cramped, not designed for people from Glasgow with their sense of entitlement and privilege. And,
but tell us about the institute itself. What was unique about it? Is it well known, well regarded?
Well, it's the main centre of Hanafi fiqh in Syria, and the Greater Levant. Very famous because it's the kind of produce of a whole school of scholarship in Damascus that preserved, centuries of learning through scholars. And Sheikh Saleh Farfur rahimahullah, who established it, was essentially in a line of scholars. His own teacher, Sheikh Badruddin al-Hassani rahimahullah, was considered to be one of the greatest scholars of hadith and Islamic sciences in the Middle East of his age, of that century. But he was one amongst many. And so Mahad al-Fath essentially encapsulated the old rigour of study and perseverance and meticulousness in preserving the sciences, with all the old books, the old methods, not cutting any corners. It prided itself in that. And because of that, it had very strict criteria of entry, and also it just culled people. I mean, I just realised this is brutal. I remember Sheikh Abdul Fattah Bizam, just before one of our exams, people were coming in for the exams, and 9 o'clock is the last time you can enter. There's people coming in at a couple of seconds after, like I'm saying, 9 o'clock, that bell went, that door's closing. and the exam starting 5 minutes afterwards, you could easily let them in. This person does not get in, they fail the year. And he's standing there saying, next year, my son. Like, you've missed it. Like, you want to come in? No, you're not coming in. And I thought, that's harsh. But the reality is that he, may Allah preserve him, is involved in the whole issue. Obviously, Syrian situation's painful to talk about. But he kept that institution going through, very difficult times in Syria. We're talking from the 80s, 90s. And it needed that iron fist, in a sense, to keep the standards up.
And is that teaching people that, this is something we're not messing about here in terms of what you're learning and the, the characteristics and values that you need? It's...
absolutely. Yeah, because even myself, I'm thinking, just give me a bit of leeway for my 6th year. And he said no. He didn't give me a pep talk on what to, how it'll be better for you. And he said, no, you can't do that because this is the rules. Because if you do it, somebody else is going to want to do it. And I think that was really important.
What was the kind of daily... You were there for about 6 years, weren't you? So what was the kind of the routine? People have a romantic idea of, people that went abroad to study, back in the 90s and what it was like. I mean, give us a picture. Can you paint a picture of what was your kind of daily routine like? What was kind of your pattern like while you were there as a student there?
I mean, to be honest, it's a vague memory. They're nice memories. They're vague. I mean, I have to think back. 7 lessons a day for 6 days a week, and I think
from Fajr, you're getting up at Fajr and then
no, I mean my own study. I mean, personal study and revisions are a separate thing. I mean, I did what I needed to do.
But what was that kind of routine then for you? What was your pattern like?
That's between me and myself. But in terms of what I had to attend, it's 7 lessons in the Mahad. Okay. So apart from that, you had, I think, 7 o'clock to about Dhuhr time, 1:30, we had classes. And then obviously you have to apply yourself to that, but also you have to have a passion outside the content, which is, I firmly believed in the fact that you have to, even though our teachers said you shouldn't study anything extraneous to the content of the Mahad, I took it as being something necessary to study one, deep dive into one subject every year. So I'd have private classes on those topics, and kind of, purchase all the main books on that. Go through the books, study different perspectives, and then augment that. And you had to kind of spread your time, so you could sustain that.
So I heard you were a recluse back in those days, and I think that's maybe where you developed some of your back injuries as well, in terms of you used to... Well, the story I heard, which I know you don't like talking, is that you just basically used to sit on the floor around your books for hours and hours and hours, and then you'd damage your back as a result of...
I have no idea. I'm not an orthopedic surgeon.
Okay.
Is that who's...
Does that sound like
no,
it could be?
I know. I mean, if you're... It was a passion, so let's just say if it's a passion, you're not thinking of what you're doing. So you do what you need to do, as they say.
Because people... Again, these are third-handed. You don't need to comment on this. So we bumped into a famous scholar, worldwide scholar, who basically said he was also in Damascus around that time, and he heard of 2 people in terms of the expats, the ones that were just dossing and messing about all the time, and they heard about you, who nobody would see you and just study. And he goes, I decided to stay away from both of them. So that was one thing. But in terms of the... people would say that, almost you'd have your kind of daily timetable hour by hour, and, you'd have your Friday or Jummah, which is just a bit of a break time, and the rest of the time, and you'd actually admonish some of the other expats for just kind of messing about or wasting time. Because at the end of that, you topped the year, wasn't it? And again, another thing I've heard is that there's only 1 or 2 people that were non-Arabs that ever became top of the year, and you were the second or something. So these are kind of things other people have said, and I know you'll be modest enough not to maybe comment on that. But is there anything you'd like to say about that?
don't recognise.
So
I mean, obviously, life is as it is.
there might be.
Yeah, so
Might be some truth to
exaggerations. Well, exaggerations.
Okay. Well, I'll assume that.
I know. Admit, I didn't admonish anybody.
Okay.
I didn't meet anybody, so how can I admonish anybody?
No, because apparently you had 1 hour on the Jummah. That would be your social time.
No, I mean
then
everybody's
you
got
would
the
get-
reasons for
But you were-
studying and.
I guess my focus is you're focused.
Yeah, obviously I was focused. I mean, the whole point is I'm saying I took this seriously because I think it wasn't just a personal journey. It's a journey. I think our dean gives us insights that need to be shared and transferred onto other people. And you know, the thing that impressed that upon me is the teachers that they. I mean, it's humbling to sit with people who have sacrificed so much. You know, and then not to give even a small portion of that back. That's what's humbling for me. So at no point did it cross my mind that I'm sacrificing or I'm going above and beyond. If anything, I'm falling really, really short of what is expected. And remember, when I finished my studies in Damascus, the teachers basically refused to teach me. They said, you need to go back. You're not welcome here. Meaning they put the effort in for a reason, which is that you go back and you give back some of the investment that they put into you in terms of time, effort, advice. You need to go back to your own countries and you know, serve other people.
Because I remember being on the other side, being in the UK, and we knew people that had gone abroad, and they'd come back maybe once a year or every couple of years, and you said, when are you coming back? And they said, well, I need to do a wee bit more, I need to study a wee bit more. And then one of the criticisms that these students of knowledge would be, well, they're just in this path of constant knowledge that when are they going to come back and give something back? We're desperate for people that are English speaking, brought up in our context. So did that ever was that something that you were conscious of in terms of actually, because in some ways I can imagine it's quite addictive to be around those scholars and constantly in that path of knowledge. And making the jump to come back, it sounds like your teachers kind of said, well, it's time to go back now, but is that something you saw with the other students around you, etc., or were you always quite clear, this is when I'm coming back? Because I think that was something that, certainly as a community being left behind, saying, well, actually we need you back, you and other, people that have gone abroad. What are your kind of thoughts around that in terms of, because it's a pivotal moment in the 90s when a lot of the British and American people were going to the Middle East, etc., to study, and we saw that with a lot of the prominent scholars worldwide that have come back, and they were formative years, but there was something in the 90s where that was kind of quite novel and quite unique. So what are your kind of reflections around that, of what was going on at that time?
I mean, I knew of people who were studying in Damascus, for example. Lots of people I knew of who were studying. I never met them. Ended up, funnily enough, meeting them in Glasgow. So people that were prominent scholars, I'd met them here in this library rather than in the same city in Damascus, for example. I was aware of the fact there was lots of people, and I always, even though I'm not involved in a lot of things, I keep abreast of what's happening and what the word in the street is. I kind of like to keep my finger on the pulse in most things. And I just kept myself focused on my own pathway. My own pathway, to be honest, wasn't I need to go back and study and to teach. It was that didn't cross my mind because I didn't think I didn't have a plan. Like the whole thing, did I have a plan when I went to university for a profession? No, I didn't. When I was studying Islamic Studies, did I have a plan on what I was going to do when I came back? No, I didn't. As soon as I got back here after having studied, did I have a plan? No, I didn't. Because I believe you, I mean, it's just a weird thing, but you just need to give up a little bit of your agency and allow the water to find its own level, which is the complete opposite of what I should be saying, which is that you need to plan out and strategize, which is a place for strategy and planning, but there's also this aspect that everything comes in its proper time if you have the right intention. So, I mean, you can't give that advice to people because it has no time frame. But you can have it in your own mindset, because if you reflect on the Quran, you find like a lot of the stories are, almost instantaneous, but they play out over long times of period. Like the story of Yaqub and Yusuf, it's like they dream, and then the completion of the dream is like such a long period of time. The dua of the Prophet Musa and the Quran saying it's been answered. It sounds as if it just happened. He did the dua and it was answered and Pharaoh was destroyed. It took 40 years. And so that was because the intention was pure. And in the end, what is written will happen. I think we don't take our theology seriously enough, like the idea of qada and qadar. And so when I was kind of planning the trip back, I was never apprehensive of what I needed to do or what needed to be done, because I didn't think I would do it. Like, you're not important enough to be the person that does something. You fit into a whole community that's essentially moving towards the same direction. You're a small facilitator, I would say, in that process.
Having studied, for the many years that you did, what would you say is the key thing people misunderstand about Islamic knowledge or scholarship or fiqh or whatever it might be? What, all the years that you've studied, if you were to say, let me distill down what people are just totally missing or not really getting when it comes to Islamic knowledge, what would you say?
I would say, well, there's lots of things, but the thing off the top of my head would be that it's, in fact, this is a course I did a course in the art of persuasion just recently. And while I do these courses, but I always make the content up as I'm going along. I don't know if you know this. So every week's like 4 weeks of courses, and the content I'm actually doing while I'm going along. And towards the last week of the course, which is the finale of the course, I came to the realization that the Prophet ﷺ and the Quranic text, at its core, I believe, I've not seen this anywhere, I've had it explained to me in this way, but I believe at the core of it is the fact that the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ are presenting value propositions to people. In other words, a value proposition is something that you give to somebody to show them that it's in their benefit to do this. And every dictate of our faith essentially is a value proposition for our benefit. So the thing that people miss, just coming back to that point, is the fact that they think that they have to sacrifice and they have to live in abject poverty or be kind of otherworldly, and when in fact the religion and the teachings are for your benefit. In other words, the telos of Islam, the focus of it and the purpose and maqsad of it is for your benefit. And Imam Ghazali talks about the sa'adah. The whole point of the deen is for you to achieve sa'adah, and that has a tie to worship of God, obviously obligations, but essentially when we present Islam, we speak about Islam, everything we're talking about in some way ties into this idea of facilitating felicity for the person that you're speaking to. That's myself, that's yourself. And everything has to be focused when you're looking at Islam in terms of that goal. And I think that's what people miss. It's about power, it's about authority, it's about practicing, doing things, finding things difficult, over stretching yourself physically, spiritually. No, it's about whatever is right for you at this moment in time, that balance, that tranquility, that ease, that facilitation. Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah says the Prophet ﷺ came with two major tasks in his Sharia, one of which is to facilitate ease for people, and the other is to do things gradually, which is essentially the same thing. Everything's gradual, which means why do you make things gradual? It's not in God's benefit, it's in your benefit. It's to make things easy for you. I think there's this idea that we need to, and when I speak to young people now, they always ask me about hadith, like, the hadith of the strangers. Are we at that time of we're the strangers, or are we at the time when holding on to the deen is like holding on to coal? I remember this was discussed like in the 90s, and people said we're at that moment. And now, yesterday we were at an event and somebody was mentioning, are we at that time? And there's this sense that unless we're being really punished and tortured and being sidelined from society, we're not really Muslims. I think that's a misappropriation of something that is in our faith, but it's not central to our faith. It will come as a byproduct of other things. But you can have like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, a Jewish beggar was watching him, go past on his lovely horse in, scholarly garb, And he said, are you the person that says that, you know, your prophet says that, you know, this world is the prison of a believer, and how can you be the prison of a believer when you're in such luxury? But he said, look, this compared to what I'm going to get in the hereafter is abject poverty. It's not about being, you know, humbled and, you know, being trampled upon. It's about having some honour and dignity in your life as well.
Okay. So take us to your next gem, Sheikh.
What's my next gem? Okay, so this is interesting. This takes me all the way back to university. This is from Crime and Punishment, and this is in the midst of, you know, talking about reading a lot. Raskolnikov is the main he's the hero of the plot of Crime and Punishment, and he's famous for pontificating, and he's kind of a young man. He's kind of he feels that he's morally superior to everybody else, and you know, when I was reading this, I was, you know, roughly, I can imagine I'm the same age as this person. I'm putting myself in this person's boots, and you're trying to justify everything that you do. And this novel, Crime and Punishment, is interesting because it has lots of axioms, lots of kind of things you can pull out of context and just make so much of them. And this is something that he says right at the beginning. He says that, you know, making the right step and saying something that's new and innovative is something that everybody fears. Everybody fears thinking outside the box, doing something courageous, trying to make their own way. And he felt almost as if he's saying it as if he's like something above the law, he's above morality, he's above the rules of society. And at that point in my life, you know, I was reading like Bakunin, Marx, and there is this sense that people create laws which they say are moral, but they're not moral for anybody apart from themselves. They're above morality. And it was interesting for me because Islam says something different in one way, which is that the morality is well known. But this quote has a degree of truth within it, which is that he has this very interesting insight into the human psyche, which is that people just like towing the line, just keeping to what is known, what our forefathers did, and that's exactly what you have to do at this moment in time. Whereas at that point in my life, you know, I remember I got into a very heated argument with an imam in Glasgow because I was saying, like, there's no facilities for kids in the mosques, young people are not coming to the mosques, everything's in foreign languages, and this resonated with me because it's a thing that people fear, something that's outside their comfort zone, something that is not heard of. And just because it's not heard of, people fear it. But, you know, I lost my temper. My father, you know, told me off for it. But essentially, I felt, look, why are people scared of new things? And for me, that means even my own life. I've always said whatever I think is correct, even if everybody's saying, well, we don't think that's the case. Like if everybody's on a topic is saying, or the general public opinion amongst my peers or friends is something else, and I am convinced of the opposite, I'm not fearful of saying that. I'd rather say that and have it on record than just capitulate to the masses and just say, okay, this is what they want to hear. Okay, I'll say that.
And I think you are somebody who likes to try different things and take a risk and take a chance. And I wonder whether then coming on to that phase when you came back to the UK and you started iSyllabus, and I think that's obviously taken a large part of your life over the last decade. Give us an insight in terms of what did it take to put that together? What were you thinking? Because it's obviously, how would you describe it? I mean, on the website, it's described as recalibrating Islamic education in the West, and you go through 5 different points in terms of making it relevant, the function, synthesis, language, and competency. But how would you describe what were you trying to do with iSyllabus? As you obviously co-founded it with Sheikh Ahmed Jamil, but you developed a lot of the content. What were you thinking? Who was your target audience? Because I guess it was innovative in many ways. Because the natural path you would have thought is, well, come back to the UK, become an imam or a hospital chaplain or a prison chaplain. That was kind of the only jobs really for people that had studied abroad, or maybe teach Arabic in the school or something. So take us through, you come back, and then where does iSyllabus come from? What are you trying to do with it? And what is that kind of, how do you come to start a new project? How did you get people interested? Who were the early people that got involved?
Yeah, so the iSyllabus project, I mean, it is a partnership, and it's kind of, and it wouldn't exist if it wasn't a partnership. And the reason why it's a partnership is because I knew that Sheikh Jamil was studying abroad. He was going to come back. Essentially, we would be doing similar things. We discussed it, and I felt it wasn't. I didn't really teach when I got back. I kind of, did small amounts of teaching, but I thought if he's coming back, we'll speak, and we'll come to an agreement on working jointly on this project. So it was very important to do that, because I think it's important to have somebody that you can have that points out your blind spots, and you can kind of throw ideas towards them, and they can kind of filter them, and it's a check and balance. I think is really important. I was speaking to somebody recently, and they were going to just start things up, and I said, well, you need somebody with you at all times and partner up with you and to do the work. But in that partnership, I kind of did say that I wanted to take charge of the educational content. So the development of it, the idea behind it. And I got into lots of arguments from people that had studied abroad and had come back. And I said, you can't just come back and teach what you studied abroad. And you can't even teach the books you've studied abroad here to the majority of people. And so I believe that this education had to go mass market. I believed it had to be changed. And I was a firm believer in the fact that there's certain things that you have to incorporate within that as well. So the language component, English, looking at the end result, which is creating competency. In other words, it's useful knowledge, relevance, context, all these things. I think when you're discussing what you're putting into the content, you have to look at all these aspects that I kind of discussed a number of times, and it's on the website as well. Those were essential to creating the course. And alhamdulillah, like the people that I initially disagreed with, they've come round to the fact that this is the most successful way of teaching Islam. So a lot of people up and down the UK have kind of taken on that kind of modular teaching, and it's been alhamdulillah, it's been very, very successful in terms of the number of people that have gone through the courses, and even the kind of the general kind of feedback we've had. Every year we have feedback forums, we read them, go through them, amend content, but alhamdulillah, it's been a course which has introduced people to their faith in a way that I think has changed their perspective. We meet people, families who've grown up in the shade of the course, whose children are doing the youth programs and so on and so forth. So, the iSyllabus has taken a lot of energy, it's taken a lot of time, but essentially I was doing it while I was studying from the very start of my studies, because I was always processing what I was studying and thinking, how relevant is it to people, in their own, sphere of influence, a person who's, a housewife or a doctor or whatever. How does it fit into their life, and how is it important to them? The Islamic education we give has to be relevant to them as well.
Can you give an example of how this is different than what else was being taught in the UK, or how it would have been taught in another country? Like in what way is it different when you talk about the context or talk about the audience? What was different about iSyllabus? Because it's different tiers, aren't there? There's, and it's various iterations, but fundamentally, is there an example or how you can say how you approached it that you thought I'm going to want to teach this differently than?
I mean, you could say, well, it's the content that's important. It's the context within which you teach, like the auditoriums or whatever. That's irrelevant. Like where you teach it is irrelevant. The content is really important, but it's also the impact, the competency that is created in the student that's important. So at the end of the process, you have to check whether a person who came in starting from zero has turned into hero, that you want to simplify it to base language, if they can do things that they couldn't do at the beginning. And that is the sign of success. And my issue was with studying the classical books as they are. There's so much to unpack within a classical work. And in fact, in this library I've taught like books on rhetoric and grammar. The class is going for 4 or 5 hours without break. It's a long process to understand a classical text, whereas we need information that is relevant to people and is deep as well. It's not just superficial, it's deep, contextual, and it gives things that we've in fact never studied ourselves in the Middle East. Like there's, in the diploma courses, content which is related to the Prophet ﷺ's ijtihad, which we never really studied, the Prophet ﷺ's capacity of speaking. That's something that you would study in master's or PhD level in Islamic Studies. There's lots of things that are in the basic course that are things that most scholars in their lifetime of study would never study. And so it wasn't just simplifying it, it was giving people depth, deep diving into things that they need for the West, and then simplifying things like, give off the top of my head, in the prayer there's certain things that are makruh, like disapproved of in the Hanafi school. 70 or so list. I brought that down to 2 because there's 2 essential axioms that tell you all of those. So you cull that, and you're not just doing a disservice to the science and the discipline, and then you add on content that's relevant about things that their kids or their work colleagues are asking, and then at the end of it, people go through and they know their fard ayn, they know how to pray, they know how to answer questions on all these things, but they have a depth when they're talking about the Prophet ﷺ to a non-Muslim, for example, so that people say, okay, that's why you're so enthralled by this person. Like they understand why people who are Muslim are so attached to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's what's important at this point in time.
And before the pandemic, I mean, you guys were traveling a lot. So I think, would you take on 4 or 5 cities every year and rotate that? And a lot of the teaching yourself and Sheikh Amr were doing. And
yeah,
constantly traveling.
The last years, yeah. I mean, I did my mileage for the last year. It was 70,000 miles or something. And I don't drive, so I didn't drive at the time because of my health. So, I mean, thinking back of having young kids, dropping off at school before taking a train, and then getting a train from one city to another city, and then getting back in time to pick the my son or daughter up, and then all that with my wife working as well. It seems to be undoable and insanity at the same time. But you didn't think of it because there's people saying you need to teach in this city and that. I think it was sometimes 6 cities on the go, with the different levels added onto that. So you'd have the intermediary and you had advanced classes. And so all of that meant that it was a very tight schedule in terms of timings from one city to another. And it was disorientating as well. So I'd go into a lecture hall and think, okay, what year is this? Who are you? What are we studying? Like what page? And you just had to deliver right away. And ended up having health consequences, brain fog they call it. I remember sitting sometimes in the midst of a sentence and I just like look at somebody and then they're thinking, okay, somebody comes and whispers and says, okay, continue. So it was physically exhausted. Yeah, it was exhausting. Yeah. But the thing was, there was, in Glasgow we had like 270 people in Tuesday classes. So that's the biggest class, I think, in Western Europe in Islamic Studies for a year-long course. That was regular every week. And so when we did it, we never thought, look at the figures and look at the number of people doing it, but it was something that if people wanted to learn, we did feel that, myself, Sheikh Amr, felt that we had a duty to do that, as we could.
And obviously since the pandemic, you've moved it online, and I guess that gives you a global audience as well. But let's go on to your next gem, Sheikh.
My next gem is actually, because we obviously, with students, you take them on trips, and Umrah is one of the trips that we kind of take people on. And I remember, I don't remember, it was 2018, I took a group, and my mother was in that group as well, so I took her. And I remember we were passing through Mina. This is like a tour of Mina and Arafat and things. And I was just like speaking to some students, and then she says, "Oh look, she's sitting next to me." She said, "Oh, that's the aqueduct that Zubaydah Hatun created." She was the wife of Harun al-Rashid, very famous. And as soon as she said that, first thing I thought was, why didn't I should be telling people, because I'm a tour guide. So remember, I was telling people this is that, and it just slipped my mind that it would still exist. I didn't know the remnants of it still existed, because she built water supplies and places of rest from all the way from Baghdad all the way to the Hajj. And at one point, her engineer said, "Look, this is too expensive." And I remember it was one of my history teachers in Damascus who said this to me, and he was like, he would stand up and it was almost as if he's taking you on a tour, like when he's talking about a great victor or a point in history, he was enacting the whole thing, and he said, "Idrib walau kana bikulli darbatin dinar." You know, do it even if every strike of the hammer costs a gold coin. And he said it, and then obviously he said, "Look, guys, you need to, if whatever you need to do, it doesn't matter what you have to do. If you need to do it, do it. It doesn't matter how much it costs." So this is the thing about Damascus. One thing, stayed with me from Damascus is the fact that once you've decided to do something, you don't look at what you need to input. You just get on with it. And for her time, she's thinking she's going to go bankrupt. For her, it wasn't important. Do I need to provide water for pilgrims? Yes, I do. Okay, how am I going to convince this person? I'm so serious that if it takes a gold coin for every strike of the hammer, that's what you have to do. And for me, a lot of times when I'm speaking to people and they think about projects, I think, it's a bit too difficult and it's too much. And I'm thinking, do you need to do it? Do we need to do this? Okay, it doesn't matter what we need to do. To get there, we have to do that. It's non-negotiable. And for me, in life, that's something that I'm firmly entrenched within, that mindset, that if there's something that needs to be done, you decide whether it needs to be done. Are we agreed? Okay, what do we need to do? Okay, does it sound difficult? Doesn't matter, we're going to do that. We'll find a way of doing that. And that's the difference between the Muslim mindset now and a lot of the mindsets that you have in society generally. They'll think, okay, we want to do this. They don't think that they need £4 billion investment to do it. They decide they're going to do it and they pitch it. What Muslims do is they know they need to do this and think, oh, but I'm going to have to ask such and such for a loan, and then I probably can't afford to do that, and then they just go to sleep.
That is interesting. A number of people have said to me, they've come to you for advice, and you've said to them, it's usually when they're a bit stuck in some sort of project. It's are you wanting to give up because it's hard? If so, that's not a good enough reason. You need to double down. If it needs to be done, then roll your sleeves up and keep going, or keep getting it done, rather than just just say it's too hard. So, and I guess thinking about that, so you've with iSyllabus, which took up a number of years, I've seen you've also been passionate about a number of different areas to double down on, and I guess I've seen you particularly around areas of Islamic finance, medical ethics. You're doing courses on kind of gender and sexuality, AI as well is something that's kind of interesting. I think you're kind of talking about as well. So in terms of, for you, what are the kind of areas that you are finding interesting or grappling with, or you're kind of taking up your time now to say, actually, this is bits that I need to formulate some ideas or disseminate on. So what are the kind of the issues as an Islamic scholar that trouble you, keep you awake at night, or feel this is areas that I want to focus on just now?
I think it's more personal interest and intrigue. Like, if there's discussions about gender, sexuality, and I don't know about the issue, I just at a personal level, I need to know what's happening. I need to have a working knowledge of it, and to the point of being able to read specialist content on that, I want to get to that level. So the whole point of, being literate and being able to read things is that you can. There's this special thing that happens where specialists have this what they call the specialist blind spot, which is they're so enthralled within the topic and so close to the topic that they can't understand the topic in its breadth, and so their speciality is actually a hindrance to them. And I think in terms of Islamic scholarship, it's important for scholars to understand that even though they're not a specialist in medical ethics or in AI or in gender studies or in all these things I like to delve into, you should have a very good non-specialist working knowledge of these topics. What makes it more interesting is that they're important to you, and then they actually have ramifications to the community generally. So gender studies is something that I've taught over a decade. I've taught like 5 courses on these, and every time I've taught them, they've been different because society moves. And because it moves, it means that there's more issues coming up for the Muslim community that they're not cognizant of, which is really sad, that the Muslim community knows nothing about topics that are impacting themselves and their future generations. And for that, you need to have a working knowledge, which means you can discuss and you can provide options for those. Identity is one of the biggest things I think Muslims are grappling with now, more than gender, more than atheism. Because I think people focusing on gender issues and even atheism, debating atheists, is irrelevant, because at the core of our problems is a loss of identity as Muslims. If you fill that vacuum, the issues of gender and atheism are secondary. I personally, from my speaking with people, the thing that precipitates people's loss of faith is not an argument against God. It's the fact they've lost their identity. They've lost what it is that pulls them towards, the Shahada. And as Muslim scholars, that's what we need to connect with. That's the thing that we need to double down on. So identity, gender, AI, again, we're at a crucial stage in its development and the utilization of that. And so we need to know the parameters within which we can make use of it. Because I think personally, I don't think it's like Google. Google is individuals who are rogue, humans are rogue, giving opinions, and you're taking that opinion. AI is essentially what you make it, which means people saying, well, this is, Google on steroids. It's not. It's completely different. So the framing of it's completely different. And so that voice has to be there, that you say, no, you're making a false comparison here. This is not the same thing. And in gender discussions, a generalization, that's one generalization too far, I would say. Again, you need to have that voice that says, okay, you've got it wrong.
So Shaykh Ruzwan, take us to your next gem.
So my next gem is, just preface this with the fact that there's so many gems that are prophetic and Quranic in nature that I decided not to have anything Quranic or prophetic within it. Because, the thing about our faith is everything you read, every time you open the Quran or the Hadith of Prophet ﷺ, everything becomes a gem. Even the most nondescript aspect of a construction of a sentence is a gem, and you just need enough time to explain why it's a gem. And so, this is why I've only got one section of the Quran in this, and I've got, which is, and it's not a saying of the Prophet ﷺ, it's a description of the Prophet ﷺ, which is intriguing because a first gem which was prophetic is the hadith that the strong person is not the one that overcomes somebody in battle. That's his saying, but the reason I mention that is because it brings a memory back. The reason why I'm using this next one, which is the Prophet is described as being Da'im al-Bishri Mutawasil al-Ahzan sallallahu. He was always of good nature, but constantly in kind of reflective flux. Mutawasil al-Ahzan is like, mutawasil means to be habitually in a state of huzn. Huzn is like melancholy in some way. And they seem to be complete opposites, like constantly of good demeanour, and then to be in the state of deep melancholy. How can that be in the same person? And the Prophet was unique. And for me this is important because as Muslims we need to, I know you wouldn't agree with this, but I don't know if you do agree with this. Like you have to be two-faced in some way, in terms of, I don't think you would agree with this actually. You would actually reprimand me for this, saying what I'm going to say, which is that there is a sense that you have to put on a face for the world, and then there's a face that you show to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is from the perspective of your deep connection with God. I think you should be very wary of showing your connection to God to people. It's very important, I think, because that's the moment you do it. We know in our own tradition this idea of sincerity disappears, and the purpose of ikhlas, all that just disappears. And the Prophet ﷺ was multifaceted in the sense that he was able to capture and carry different emotions at the same time. Whereas this deep, deep connection with God, which is his concern for people, which just goes into a state of melancholy and fearfulness and trepidation for people. But then he didn't want people to feel that, so he would be constantly in this state of happiness and smiling and giving sense of security to people in difficulty. So you had to play that part, like almost like a parent who learns about the diagnosis of the child, and the child says, "What's wrong with me?" And then the parent just starts to, be very happy and, puts the child at ease. The Prophet was that. And so for me, the Prophet, this statement of the Prophet, description of him, is indicative of the complexity of the Prophet. And the reason why I think this is important to understand now is that Muslims want to create the Prophet as monodimensional, a representation of who they are. Like, their religiosity is what the Prophet is. In other words, how I practice is the Prophet practicing. Whereas you are a small drop, if that, in the personage of the Prophet. He is so complex, so encompassing, that if we were to meet him, we would be, subhanAllah, if we were to meet him, we would find ourselves out of depth. Do you understand? We would just not know what to do, because we are saying we're following him, but in essence, we're following our own understanding of what he was. And you cannot encapsulate the Prophet in one understanding of you have of him, or one statement that he's made, because his vision was multi-directional. It was towards the akhirah, it was towards the past, it was towards this point in time. Whereas as believers, we believe in looking at the moment, this moment you're in. You're doing an interview, I'm focusing on this. And I shouldn't be thinking about the past, even though you ask about questions about the past, the future. I should be here at the moment. Whereas the Prophet encapsulated past, present, future, because he was given that view by God of the signs of the end of time. He was given the admonitions of previous generations, and he was carrying that weight. And he was also concerned about people at the moment that he was speaking to them. Harisun alaykum. He is concerned about you. Bil mu'minina ra'ufur rahim. He is compassionate and merciful for the believers at the moment he was speaking to them. And so this gem is just a snapshot of who he was, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for me, that is the enduring legacy and proof of Islam. The Prophet is the proof of Islam from that perspective, that he came, and if you look at any aspect of his life, you realize that we have amazing leaders in human history who have expertise in one aspect of life, or notoriety in one aspect of life, or fame in one aspect of life. The Prophet encapsulated in a real way, in a documented way, perfection that we aspire to. And so Muslims should have the humility to understand that they don't understand the Prophet is a partial understanding. And we pray to Allah that Allah gives us, some insight into him, in the Hawd, Hawd al-Kawthar, that we see some kind of amazing insight into such an amazing, human being. Inshallah.
One of the characteristics that I'm always interested in is obviously, even throughout the Prophet, peace be upon him, life is about sacrifice. And a lot of his life has involved sacrifice. And I wonder for you, in terms of, I think the more and more I look at and speak to people around that have achieved anything significant, it takes sacrifice, even to master a language or a career or anything like that. It takes sacrifice. What would you say is the main sacrifices you've had to make on this journey of your own life so far?
I don't think anything, to be honest. If anything, people have sacrificed. I think my parents sacrificed. My parents didn't know where I was when I was in Yemen. My father found out. He came and visited me in Sayoun. He came to Sayoun, and he's got off the plane and he'd been in Karachi. He's been in places that are very hot, and he's got off the plane and said, "What on earth are you doing here?" In terms of the heat. I remember, 3 of my grandparents passed away while I was in Damascus. And my family didn't tell me about them because, they knew I was studying. And so, at that time I would contact my family probably every 6 months or something. I wasn't the best of people, as you know, in terms of communicating. And the express reason they didn't do that is because they thought it would make me lose focus. And so the sacrifice, I think, is from other people, like a bit of sleep here and there. Big deal. It's not sacrifices. It's other people, like your family, your wife, your children. They miss something of you, and my siblings, and so on and so forth. I think that's the kind of things I kind of am aware of. In terms of sacrificing, I don't think I've enjoyed it. It's been enriching. It's been a good experience. I've not felt I've missed anything. You know, everything I've got in terms of memories. And I don't have any pictures of anything or anybody. It's memories, like all the shuyukh I've mentioned and I've studied with and visited in different countries. You know, all I have is sitting with them, you know, asking for their teachings, leaving them, you know, without having a picture. It wasn't about that. It was nothing. There's no sacrifices. It's all benefits. It's all blessings. You know, a bit of hardship around along the way just tells you that you're alive. At least you feel pain.
I mean, but obviously it changes when you have a family. You know, any career or any stage in your life, quite naturally and quite rightly, it changes when you get married and then when you have children. Because there's another thing to contend with. I mean, how do you feel, you know, you've balanced that in terms of, you know, because there are people in the wings that hold things together, aren't they, and allow you to do what you do or allow us to do what we do. I mean, how do you think you've balanced that, or?
So that requires the other side to come in and provide space in this podcast to answer that question. So I think, you know, my wife, she completed a PhD while we were married. I think she's approaching senior lectureship now at university. So, but you know, people say that her work ethic is my work ethic. So I kind of, she's learned some of my work ethic, but my work ethic I don't think it's great anyway. I think it's obviously the family and your wife and your children are at the forefront of that, and they'll be the best judges of the degree to which you've balanced, you know, rights, responsibilities. But I'm very, very conscious of the fact that you have to fulfill your responsibilities, because if the people closest to you don't speak well of you and don't realise that you are being the best version of yourself, then there's no point, you know, going around the world or whatever, teaching, or, you know, I don't lecture, so I just teach. I've made a conscious decision of not giving lectures when I came back, because I think it's easy to do. It's very easy to give a lecture. You can prepare and you can put a couple of jokes in, and everyone goes away feeling really energetic. But the slog is the classes up and down the UK. Myself and Sheikh Amr, you know, that he'll know as well. He'll probably tell you as well that is difficult for the families. But you know, unless you test yourselves and test and recreate what's normal, you won't know what we're capable of doing.
Talking about families, I guess your father, may Allah have mercy on him and grant him a high status in Jannah. You know, he was probably probably stereotypical from our parents' generation of maybe from the South Asian subcontinent, came here as immigrants, worked hard and established a life, perhaps varying degrees of how emotionally connected they were with their children and stuff. Do you think he was proud of you? Did he ever say, you know, clearly he was supporting you, and as you said, you know, there's bits that they're trying to encourage you. Do you think he was pleased or proud of what you had achieved, or when you'd come back and say, actually, you know?
Well, I heard from other people that he's proud of me. So
it's the usual way, probably.
Yeah, so he never said it to me, but he had to. I mean, I was talking about sacrifice. One of my relatives, well, somebody we knew, had said that Ruzwan had actually just got married and just run away from the house, and then the cover story was that he's studying Islam. So they had to contend with that, and so, you know, and I know the person who said that, and it was interesting that I went to a mosque in Glasgow when I came back, and the Imam was travelling and said, "Can you do the khutbah for us?" And then I said, "Okay." I went in, and that person came into the khutbah, and I just remember looking at him, and I'm just giving the khutbah they talk in English, and I just see the blood drain from his, because I don't know if he thought that's what happened. So obviously he might have thought, well, he's gone rogue. He's just like found somebody, he's got married, and they're just making an excuse. And I just remember, like, my father never pulled that person up. He didn't defend myself. He didn't correct him. He said, well, if somebody's going to make that, then that's up to them. But I did hear that my father was happy, because apparently Radio Ramadan, when it was on, it was on in the radio in our house, and then he wouldn't let anybody like breathe while I was on radio. So I heard that from my wife, because he would like go around the house checking that everyone's listening to me.
Yeah.
So it puts me in a difficult situation if I'm the reason why everyone can't speak before iftar.
And do you think, are you quite an emotional person?
No, not at all. No, I don't know. Depends what you mean by emotional. Showing emotions? No, I don't show emotions at all. No.
Okay. And what's got you through the kind of the most difficult periods in your life? What's kind of kept you going? And
it's funny. The more pain I remember to the 16, I was in excruciating. I mean, I was on. I realized afterwards I was on like a whole concoction of drugs. Apparently, there's who's that? Frankie Boyle.
yeah,
He's got a DVD which is called Tramadol Nights.
yeah,
Right. I didn't realize that what I was on was so vicious and so toxic that he actually made a DVD about it. So I was on these painkillers, and I was in like excruciating pain. I was like crawling for about 6 months. I remember it was such a blessing. Yeah, I just remember my family was worried. My father, he was still alive at that time. He was worried. Everyone was worried, and I just remember it was so blissful, like just to be in need of having to call out to Allah to remedy your situation, and just realize the kind of the nature of the human being, that they just go from being able to travel when they want and do what they want to be someone that's crawling. I couldn't even pick my son up. He was just born, and just to put him on my hip would create such pain that I couldn't do it. And so, that was humiliating in some way, but it was also empowering that we as human beings, we go through situations in our lives where we have to deal with certain things. And for me, I would laugh. I would end up just laughing. This is such the irony of it was so much that I would end up finding it funny.
So as we come towards the end of the interview, how would you like to be remembered? What would you like your legacy to be?
Legacy, okay. Well, I don't want to be remembered. I seriously do not want to be remembered. I couldn't give a toss, as they say in Scotland. It doesn't make any, to be honest, like, once you've done something, you just throw it behind your back and you just move on. Like, life's too short, and there's too many things to look forward to in life to think of how people remember you. You do have this kind of emotional connection to what you would want people to think of you as, but you want them to remember who you are. Like, in reality, you want them to know the facts, and because people can't know the facts, then there's not much problem. You would want them to think of yourself as a good person, so that when your janazah is taking place, that you speak well of you. That's good. Apart from that, it's not. I don't fixate on. I say something. The last thing on my mind is what people will think about me.
Do you have any major regrets?
Major regrets. Life is full of regrets, isn't it? Missed opportunities, but those missed opportunities gave rise to opportunities.
Okay. And if you were to meet a younger Shaykh Ruzwan in his teens, or maybe, before university, what would you say to him?
Well, I meet lots of people that remind me of myself. So I meet lots of people that are uncut. Like you talk about a diamond that's uncut. I'm not saying my diamond, but I'm saying there's people that are unrefined. So I'm refined. The way I speak is not the way. When I went to Turkey, and I had to refine the way I spoke English because nobody understood Scottish. So there's lots of people I meet on a day-to-day basis where I think they just need a small, tiny piece of guidance, nothing big. Just somebody just having the common courtesy to just address them as a human being. Like, that amount of focus on a person makes a world of difference for a person that's never had that. You talk about, people that are groomed, for example. A lot of the things that are related to that are people just showing interest in them, and then it leads to these tragic situations. Imagine somebody showing interest in somebody for a benefit for them, a youth worker, a counsellor, a teacher, that interest clicks something in themselves that they can do something better. And that's the thing about, public policies, politics, that I find really nauseating, is that the things that make changes are small things. And so politicians always think about big policy changes, when in fact what creates seismic changes in societies is small things. And what I would say to a younger version of myself would be, I would just push them a bit. I wouldn't say anything of profound. It would just be that thing that's targeted towards them, that focuses them on a journey that they fulfill their own potential in, not moulding themselves into myself. But essentially, and this is why I think people think, well, the goal is to be a scholar. No, the goal is to be whoever you are, regardless of what people think of what that is, and do it in the best way and have a connection to God, and that's it. And you pass away with that. You've khalas, that's like when your judgment comes, then no one's going to ask about your degree or your wealth, or they're going to ask, like, how well did you live? And that's the thing I think we miss. We don't allow enough complexity, enough kind of variation in our roles in society. We kind of try and put everybody into this kind of very fixed idea of what success is, which I think is a massive mistake.
And how do you relax? I mean, I know you're quite a funny person. Sometimes people don't get your humour initially, especially in classes. But I mean, how do you, in your downtime, how do you relax? What makes you laugh? What kind of do you do? Because you can't always be on and study and academic and thinking all the time. But
yeah,
what
I
do you
was speaking
do
to my wife
wind
yesterday about this. I said I'm gonna, I've been busy. So I said I'm going to take a couple of days off and enjoy myself. And she said, how are you going to do that? And I thought, I don't know. Because if something's intriguing, then I want to know about it. So it's like, that's downtime. Alhamdulillah, I think everything I'm doing is downtime. I don't think there's a space which is not downtime, like spend time with my kids or just messing about. I do kind of building work and all this kind of stuff as well, like on the side, just to relax. Or just take my mind off things. I like going walking, but when I'm walking, I'm formatting ideas. So everything is it gives me pleasure to format an idea, format something that gives a new perspective on something that I've read, like Islamic Studies. I'm always rethinking what we had studied to see, okay, how does it make sense in this age? How can we reformulate it? Is there something that's a blind spot in previous scholarship? Or is there something that in previous scholarship I think is a blind spot, which I need to learn and revisit? So all that is inquisitiveness. I think that's downtime, because that's what gives pleasure.
Fantastic. And tell us about your last gem.
Yeah, the last gem, I had to go for a Quranic section. It was Wal Asr, because it's one of these things. I do a kind of show in Ramadan in which I go through a chapter of the Quran and reflect upon it, and it's unscripted, and when I go through it, what's interesting is that the most nondescript verse that nobody's focused on, through a conversation you find out it is just the most amazing gem that you've ever thought of. So much depth, so much nuance, and that's everywhere in the Quran, from the most nondescript version of a conversation between Fir'aun and the Prophet Musa alayhi salatu wasalam to deep verses that are about considered to be some of the most profound chapters of the Quran. Wal Asr is of that nature. Wal Asr is Imam Shafi'i said that if nothing apart from the Quran had been revealed, this would have been enough. Wal Asr, by the passage of time, that human beings are in a state of loss. And I think that encapsulates a philosophy of how human beings should be, that the human being as an ontological reality is always in decrease, biologically, socially, economically. They're always going into regression. And that can only be stopped by something which is a connection with God. And that is, I think that's such a deep thing to understand, that everything is decreasing. And Imam Al-Razi, he said something interesting about this when he was talking about it. He said, this is almost like the person who's selling ice in the marketplace, who's, as the ice is melting, is saying, come and buy this ware before it disappears and my livelihood disappears. It's like, he said he never understood the chapter until he heard that instance. Such an amazing thing. And that's the reality of what we are in. Unless we're moving forward, we're in decrease. And that covers our own lives, family lives. Unless you're building, unless you're going forward, you're going into regression. So unless you're improving your relationship with your family or your wife or your community, you're actually doing a disservice to them. And unless you're, as an ummah, increasing and in terms of your vitality, you're going to go into regression. And if you take that to the geopolitical level, the ummah has essentially fallen into that the moment it stopped taking its own principles seriously and it took its eye off the ball, it started to go into regression. So the chapter is one example of many. I thought it would be good just to have one example from the Quran text.
And obviously we're going to send you off to this desert island. How do you think you would cope with the solitude and with the survival side of things?
It's difficult. I don't know how would I survive the social aspect of life. It would be very difficult. Anyway, no, that's a joke. Yeah. Look, in summer, I have this time when I don't speak. So then when the teaching season comes up, the first week is just so difficult to have to start speaking again. I remember when I was in Damascus, I don't think, it was like long periods of time I didn't speak to anybody. And I think while I was studying, I think I asked like 3 questions. So I'm generally not somebody that speaks, which is why, people are surprised that, I don't like speaking. I hate speaking. Is so mundane. Isn't it just such a mundane aspect of the human being, unless there's a function to it. And that's, I think Imam Mahad is talking about, people that we aim to be like, who are criticized for being silent when it's the knowledge of God that makes them silent, and there's people that are criticized for speaking too much when it's the knowledge of God that makes them speak. In other words, you do what you're asked to do, by God. You're trying to not decide when you want to speak or not speak. If you need to speak, you need to speak. You can't just decide to turn it on and off. So I think I would survive okay, because there's no need to speak.
Enjoy the isolation. And you can take a book apart from the Quran with you to this desert island. What book would you take?
So that's something I've actually just practiced, because I moved to Istanbul, and obviously I had to take some books, and I only took 2 books. So I've almost answered the question, because I took 2 books. One was Jamal Jawami', which is on Usul al-Fiqh, juristic methodology by Imam Subki. Because it's just a compendium. It's one of the books I studied in Damascus. It's a compendium of hermeneutics, of legal theory, but within it's got tasawwuf, spirituality, it's got everything, to the point that if I'm asked a question, it's somewhere in that book. Some footnote, because it's not one book, it's a gloss with a commentary and a super commentary. Within those kind of few words, there's something that points out a very deep thing. And so I did that. I took that, and I took, Suyuti's Al-Iqtirah, which is on the principles of grammar. 2 books I took. There's only 2 books, Arabic books I took from Glasgow.
And you can take a luxury item with you on the island. What would that be?
Yeah, the luxury item is Fortnum & Mason's Royal Blend tea. Because it brings back memories. I love tea, and in fact I've not tasted this for must be 28 years. I had a Shaykh Abdul Qadir, a Sufi. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a Scottish convert. Very interesting. I grant him Jinnah. He passed away when I was in Bulgaria a couple of years ago, and I used to make tea for him. So I stayed with him for a period of time. And he used to drink this, and I got addicted to this as well. it was a very, very, very special taste. And so luxury, that would be luxury. I've not had it for, as I said before, decades. And I think apparently I said to people that I'd love this tea, and they started talking about Fortnum and Mason, and apparently it's turned into some kind of eatery or something, and apparently because it's kind of branched out into other things. But that time it was just for tea. It was just famous for making really good tea.
So we'll get lots of people probably trying it out now, inshallah. So Shaykh Ruzwan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. It's been a real honour and pleasure, worth the wait. All I can say is may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to give you the strength and the fortitude to continue with the work that you do, and continue to teach others, inshallah, and hopefully benefit the community and the ummah as well. So please keep us all in your du'as, and may Allah protect you and your family, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.